She was the kind of person who smiled even when her eyes told a different story. The kind of person who said, "I'm fine," and meant, "I just don't want to burden you. Her name doesn't matter." Because you've met her before. Maybe in the mirror, she walks through life quietly, the observer in the room, always listening, always holding space for others, while no one notices the silent storm beneath her stillness. There's a softness to her presence, the kind that draws others in. But that softness wasn't born from peace. It was carved from pain, from years of learning that to be loved, she must first be strong. Carl Jung once wrote that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And she was, in many ways, the embodiment of that truth, a soul forged in the quiet fire of endurance. She didn't shout her emotions. She folded them into small, invisible corners of her heart. People often told her how calm she was, how put together she seemed. They didn't realize that her calm was not peace. It was control. Control over the chaos that once swallowed her whole. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to survive the world. A mask that tells everyone, "I'm fine. I can handle it." But behind that mask, the shadow whispers, it holds the grief, the anger, the exhaustion we've denied for too long. And when someone feels as deeply as she does, the shadow doesn't disappear. It just learns to hide better. There were days when she wanted to scream, but silence felt safer. Nights when the memories came back, but she smiled anyway, pretending she'd outgrown them. She built a life around being strong, not realizing that this performance of strength was slowly erasing the parts of her that needed love most. Jung said that what we repress doesn't vanish, it waits. It waits in the unconscious, shaping our thoughts, our choices, our relationships. And for those who feel deeply, this repression becomes both their protection and their prison. People admired her empathy. They said she understood others so well. But empathy like hers isn't learned. It's inherited through pain. It comes from knowing what it's like to be unseen, unheard, misunderstood. She saw others clearly because she had spent a lifetime studying her own darkness. But even the strongest soul grows tired of carrying its own weight. And one day, when the mask begins to crack, the truth leaks through. Maybe in a sudden burst of tears, maybe in quiet withdrawal, maybe in the simple exhaustion of having to be the one who always holds it together. It's in that breaking that Jung found the beginning of healing. Because he believed the soul doesn't shatter to end us. It breaks so the light can enter the hidden parts. The parts we've abandoned, denied, or silenced in the name of survival. So this is not a story about weakness. It's a story about unseen strength. The kind that doesn't announce itself with noise or pride. The kind that exists in the silent act of getting up again, when the world has no idea how hard it was to fall. The people who feel the deepest don't wear their pain on their sleeves, not because they lack honesty, but because they've learned the cost of vulnerability in a world that doesn't listen. They hide it because their love is sacred, their emotions vast, their inner life too raw to be handled carelessly. Jung understood this paradox, that the deeper the feeling, the quieter the expression. And that sometimes the most wounded souls are the ones who carry the most light. This is their story. And maybe it's yours too. Segment 1, the weight beneath. Still waters people often mistake calmness for peace. But peace is something earned, something conscious. Right? While calmness can be a disguise. The ones who feel deeply often learn very early that their emotions are too much for the world. Too intense, too sensitive, too heavy. And so they do what many quiet souls have done across generations. They begin to hide the ocean within them behind a still surface. Jung called this surface the persona, the mask designed to meet the expectations of society. It's the version of us that knows when to smile, when to nod, when to say, "I'm fine." But the persona isn't false. It's necessary. Without it, the world can feel too raw, too unfiltered. Yet, beneath that carefully crafted calm lies what Jung described as the shadow, the repressed, unexpressed self. Not just the darkness, but also the unlived emotions, the forgotten creativity, the love that was never returned. The deeper a soul feels, the heavier this shadow becomes. It's like carrying an invisible ocean in your chest. The surface must remain still, so others don't drown in what you carry. But below that stillness, there are waves. Memories that crash, desires that churn, fears that pull. And every act of restraint becomes another ripple contained. Those who feel deeply don't speak often, because they are aware of how words can wound. They understand silence, not as avoidance, but as reverence. Reverence for the emotions that once consumed them. You can see it in their eyes, that calm, steady gaze that makes you feel safe. But look closer, and you'll notice it's not the gaze of someone untouched by pain. It's the gaze of someone who has walked through their own fire and learned how to carry its warmth without burning others. Jung believed that within each of us lies an instinct to balance opposites, the conscious and unconscious, the visible and the hidden. The calm exterior, then, isn't deceit. It's a form of alchemy. It's the soul's way of transforming chaos into order. Every restrained tear, every quiet act of endurance is an alchemical act, turning suffering into understanding. but this calm has a cost. Because the person who holds so much learns to minimize their needs. They become the healer, the listener, the stable one. And slowly, they forget what it feels like to be held in return. Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. For the wounded soul, this means that the pain they hide begins to shape the way they live, the people they choose, the love they give, the boundaries they neglect. What feels like kindness is often a survival pattern. What looks like strength is often fear wearing a mask of composure. And yet, there's something profoundly beautiful in this kind of strength, because even in hiding, these souls create space for others to breathe. They absorb pain, not because they must, but because they can. Their sensitivity becomes a sanctuary for others who are too afraid to feel. Still, there's a silent tragedy in always being the calm one. Because calm people rarely receive what they give. Their emotional maturity becomes an expectation, not a gift. People forget that the still water carries the deepest weight. Jung would say this is the danger of living only through the persona, that one day the mask becomes too heavy. The ocean starts to rise. And the person who once seemed so composed begins to unravel, not because they are weak, but because their soul is demanding to be seen in full. This is the moment when still waters start to stir. When the unconscious, the shadow, begins to knock from below, asking for light, and the soul that once survived by hiding begins to remember that it deserves to exist without disguise. The calmest people you know, they are not untouched by storms. They have simply learned how to carry the rain within them, quietly, gracefully, until one day they realize the only way to truly heal is to let it pour. Segment 2, the armor of sensitivity, how deep feelers learn to hide their pain. They say that the kindest people often carry the deepest wounds. It's not a coincidence. It's a pattern, one Jung would have called a psychological defense, a way the unconscious tries to protect what still hurts, somewhere in childhood perhaps. There was a moment when the deep feeler first realized that their emotions were too much for the world, that their tears made others uncomfortable, that their sensitivity, instead of being a bridge, was treated as a burden. So they adapted. They began to smile when they were breaking. They began to make others laugh, so no one would ask what was wrong. They became the comforters, the listeners, the healers, anything but the one who needed help, and slowly the armor began to form. It's not made of steel. It's made of charm, humor, warmth, traits that make the world love them. But beneath that armor lives a quiet ache, a fear that if anyone saw the rawness beneath, they'd turn away. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to face society. But for the wounded soul, that mask isn't vanity, it's survival. Because somewhere deep down, they've equated vulnerability with danger. They've learned that to be seen too clearly is to risk being hurt again, and so they build a life of beautiful half-truths. To everyone else, they seem fine, successful, kind, composed, but inside, their heart is an overgrown garden of unspoken griefs. They replay old conversations. They think about the words they never said, the apologies they never got, the moments they wish they could rewrite. And when night falls, and the noise fades, the mask begins to crack. Because no matter how hard they try, the soul has a way of reminding them that it exists, through exhaustion, through the quiet sadness that visits even in moments of joy, through the sudden tears that come for no reason at all. The truth Jung pointed toward is that repression doesn't erase the pain, it buries it in the unconscious. And from there, it shapes everything. It decides who we fall in love with. It decides what we fear. It decides the very stories we tell ourselves about who we are. The wounded soul thinks, if I can just hold it together, maybe I'll be safe. But life, in its strange, compassionate way, keeps sending them mirrors. People who remind them of their old pain. Situations that expose the cracks in their armor, not to punish them, but to bring them back to what was abandoned. Because healing doesn't begin when we add more armor. It begins when we finally dare to remove it. And that's the paradox Jung wanted us to see. That the sensitivity we try to suppress is not our weakness. It's our depth. It's the proof that our soul still feels, still hopes, still longs for meaning. But before it can become wisdom, it must be felt, not hidden. And until that happens, the deep feeler will keep living between two worlds. The one they show, and the one they endure in silence. Segment 3, the shadow of compassion. Why we attract the wounded. There's a certain irony to the hearts that have suffered the most. They often become magnets for other broken souls. It's not a curse. It's not coincidence. It's the unconscious, recognizing itself in another. Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And so, the deep feeler meets someone who seems strangely familiar, not because they've known them before, but because their pain speaks the same silent language. There's an instant understanding, a spark that feels like destiny. But beneath that chemistry, something ancient is happening. The wounded parts of both souls have found a mirror. You see, When we have unhealed pain, it doesn't simply disappear. It waits, quietly, in the depths of the psyche, seeking resolution. And the easiest way for the unconscious to heal is through reflection, through someone who embodies what we've disowned. That's why the one who always fixes others finds themselves drawn to the one who needs saving. Why the nurturer attracts the broken. Why the strong fall for the lost. It's not always love at first sight. Sometimes it's recognition at first wound. Jung called this the shadow bond, a connection built not on wholeness, but on mutual unconscious need. It feels intoxicating because it touches the deepest parts of us. But that very intensity often hides the truth. We're not falling in love with the person in front of us, but with the reflection of what's unresolved within. The deep feeler thinks, they need me. I can help them. I understand their pain. And maybe they can, for a while. But eventually, helping becomes fixing. Fixing becomes enabling. And love becomes a quiet reenactment of the same old wound, trying to heal others in the hope that someone will finally stay to heal them. This is the tragedy of unconscious compassion. When empathy is guided by pain instead of awareness, it becomes self-sacrifice disguised as love. Jung believed that true compassion isn't about merging with another's suffering, it's about standing with them without losing yourself. But for the wounded soul, that boundary can feel impossible, because beneath their kindness lives a fear, the fear of abandonment. So they give more, they listen more, they love harder, until one day they realize they've become the caretaker of someone else's chaos, while their own heart grows emptier with each act of giving. And yet, this too has purpose, because life keeps repeating lessons until the soul finally understands. You cannot save another from drowning if you are still underwater yourself. The people we attract are not accidents. They are invitations. Each one holds a mirror to something we haven't yet faced. A chance to turn the unconscious into awareness, to stop mistaking pain for connection. The moment we see that clearly, the cycle begins to break. Compassion transforms from a wound into a strength. Love becomes something steadier, not the desperate need to be seen, but the calm willingness to see another fully without losing yourself in the process. And that's the alchemy Jung spoke of, when what once hurt us becomes what heals us, when we stop seeking rescue and start seeking truth. Because in the end, real love doesn't begin when we meet the right person. It begins when we stop meeting the same wound in different faces. Segment 4, the path. Back to wholeness, loving without losing. Your self-healing doesn't announce itself. It begins quietly. In the moments you stop chasing what hurts you and start listening to what you truly need. After years of loving from your wounds, there comes a stillness, a kind of exhaustion that isn't just physical but spiritual. You realize that the constant giving, the endless fixing, the desperate reaching for those who cannot stay, it isn't love. It's longing wearing the mask of love. Jung believed that love, in its truest form, is not the merging of two halves, but the meeting of two wholes. He wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. That transformation cannot happen when one is dissolving into the other. So what does it mean to love without losing yourself? It begins with the courage to turn inward, to face the shadow you've been trying to outrun. All the patterns, the people, the pain, they weren't punishments, they were messages. Each person you called the one, but who left you emptier than before, they carried a lesson wrapped in heartbreak. They showed you where you abandon yourself. They revealed where your love turns into self-erasure, and once you see that, something shifts. You begin to realize that the love you've been trying to earn was never outside of you. It was the love you were meant to give yourself. The truth is, when we stop seeking completion in another, we start discovering our own fullness. That's where real relationships begin. Not from need, but from awareness. Not from desperation, but from strength. When you know who you are, when you've met your shadow, embraced your sensitivity, forgiven your past, you no longer confuse chaos for connection. You no longer chase intensity for validation. You stop mistaking being needed for being loved, and that's when the chemistry changes. The energy you once spent fixing others starts nurturing your own growth. You begin attracting differently, people who match your peace, not your pain. Love stops being a battlefield and becomes a mirror, reflecting not your wounds, but your wholeness. Jung often spoke of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. He saw it as the soul's highest calling. And to him, every relationship was an opportunity for this transformation, not by losing yourself in another, but by discovering more of yourself through them. Because the truth is, you cannot meet someone deeply if you haven't met yourself deeply first. You cannot love someone freely if you still fear being alone. And you cannot build something real if you're still trying to heal something old. Loving without losing yourself means recognizing that connection is not a cure. It's a mirror. The right person won't fill your emptiness. They'll remind you that it was never empty to begin with. They won't complete you. They'll challenge you to become more complete. They won't take away your darkness. They'll sit beside it with compassion until you see that it isn't something to hide, but something to understand. This is where the journey leads. Back to yourself. Back to the quiet knowing that love isn't about holding on. It's about allowing. It's not about becoming one with another. It's about standing side by side, both whole, both awake, both free. And maybe that's the ultimate truth Jung was pointing toward, that the soul doesn't seek another half. It seeks reflection, resonance, and growth. Because once you've learned to love yourself with depth and clarity, you'll never again settle for a love that asks you to disappear. In the end, the people who've been broken the deepest don't rise with noise. They rise quietly, like dawn after a long, sleepless night. They carry no bitterness, only understanding. No rage, only clarity. Jung once said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And perhaps that is what every wound, every heartbreak, every shadow has been guiding you toward, the simple, unshakable truth of your own being. When the illusions fall away, when you no longer mistake suffering for love or intensity for meaning, what remains is something far more powerful. Peace, not the peace of avoidance, but the peace that comes after facing the storm and realizing it never truly controlled you. You start to see that the people who hurt you were not villains in your story. They were mirrors, each one showing you what was still unloved within you. And when you can look at them without anger, without longing, without pain, only understanding, that's when you know you've healed. This is what it means to be whole, to walk through the fire, to let it burn away the illusions, and to step out not as someone new, but as someone true. Real love, then, isn't found in another. It's found in the courage to meet yourself fully, shadow, wound, and all. And when you do, love stops being something you chase. It becomes something you embody, something that flows from you effortlessly. Not as need, but as truth. So if you've loved and lost, if you've been broken and rebuilt, don't wish for the person who hurt you to return. Thank them silently for showing you the way back to yourself. Because that's where the real chemistry begins. Not between two bodies, but between your soul and its wholeness. And when you reach that point, love is no longer a wound to heal. It becomes a light that never fades,